Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
Support comes from Mercedes-Benz of Buckhead, where the power of electric meets the power of Mercedes. Introducing a lineup of electric vehicles, the EQB, the EQS sedan and SUV, the EQE sedan and SUV. The vehicles are all electric. The feeling is all Mercedes. Mercedesofbuckhead.com.
We want to welcome you to a new episode of Political Breakfast. We're now heard twice a week. The podcast will be available on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tharon Johnson, our Democratic strategist, is here, but Brian Robinson is not. He sends greetings and says he hates to miss his first week, but he's a little under the weather and will be back real soon. So, Brian, I just want you to know we miss you and we look forward to having you back. But in for Brian today, the former state chair of the GOP, Chuck Clay, former state senator, and thank you for being here. You two were feeling a little under the weather yesterday, but you said yes. You said, yes, I will show up, and we certainly do appreciate you. So hello and welcome to Political Breakfast.
As I said years ago in Blazing Saddles, the fool's going to do it. Oh, excuse me, for you, congratulations. So,
hardly a fool. Yeah, but quite the insider when it comes to politics. And you and Tharon were just chatting. You guys ran into each other recently, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and listen, Lisa, thank you so much for doing this. And I didn't get a chance to get this in earlier in the week, but thank you and Lily for fighting hard for us. And thank you to WABE for really rewarding our listeners, because without our listeners and supporters, this podcast would not be, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't be in existence. But to go to 2 days a week, I mean, that is awesome. And so just, thank you all so much for your dedication and leadership and putting up with me and Brian week after week. And I think that this is an award for our hard work and dedication to now be able to be promoted to being 2 times a week. But I was sharing the story, Lisa. Anytime I can see my good friend and chairman and former state senator Chuck Clay anywhere, is always a treat. But he kind of saved me about a week ago, because I, everybody know I'm a registered lobbyist, and in order to get things done in this state of Georgia, and Chuck Clay is the sort of person who laid the groundwork for this model I'm about to talk about. But you got to be able to work on both sides. You don't necessarily always got to agree with the other side, but you got to be able to work on both sides, particularly when you have clients. And so I had the brave idea, Lisa and Lily, to go to the Republican Leadership Senate Caucus fundraiser and had checks in hand, and at the front door, and Chuck can test him, basically confirm this. I ran into my good friend, Governor Brian Kemp, and my better friend and better looking and better half of the governor, First Lady Marty Kemp. And we were holding court at the entrance. And Lisa, they were so shocked to see me. They thought I was lost. The first lady said, "Hey, are you coming here to eat?" And I said, "No, I'm coming here to hand off some checks." And then next to me walks in the senator and the governor. Matter of fact, Lisa and Lily stopped talking to me. The governor ended his conversation with me and started talking to Chuck. And it was a good way to see him and watch him work the room. And there was some good conversations had in that room that day.
Anytime you could do that, it's productive, and ditto to everything you've said, and kudos to the team here. I always said there, when I went to the Senate, I was the 8th Republican out of 56. If you looked under the dictionary under I for irrelevant, you would have seen my face. And if I didn't have Dem friends, I would have no friends. I'm not sure that I did, but obviously, it was a great training ground for how the system is supposed to work. We all agree on some fundamental issues. We may come in somewhat different directions, but the fact of the matter is, if you agree on the underlying challenge, problem, issue you're trying to address, there is plenty of common ground to get to a result for the people of Georgia. And I applaud all those, Democrat or Republican. I wear my uniform proudly, but I applaud all those who make it work, because without that, we don't have government. And you can say the obvious about D.C., but Georgia still works.
Yeah, as a senator and former GOP, that's always been your message. And I remember the last time we talked to you on WABE, this was, right after the whole President Trump debacle here in this state. And there was all the talk that the GOP, the Republican Party here in the state of Georgia, was just totally separated in every direction. Where do you find the party now when you look at it? Is it coming together nicely as you had hoped 2 years ago?
At one level, I'd say yes, predominantly. At another levels, down at the pure grassroots level, there is still a good bit of ongoing tension. You saw, an action by a Republican official issuing some kind of statement condemning Republicans. And my view is if you spend them off as a Republican, spend your energy on figuring out how to beat Democrats, and if a Democrat figuring out how to beat Republicans, but trying to beat up each other by our own team is not the way to get to success. So I'd say that since I'm the Republican one on there, I say that to my own party and the party faithful. Boys and girls, it's time to really belly up, and you got to swallow some of your pride. Doesn't mean you got to swallow your principles, but you're going to have to swallow some of your pride, maybe some of your competitiveness, and figure out how it is you're going to win. I don't see us as split up as we have been. I do think leadership, both at the party level and at the state level, but I don't say that it's just a complete harmony, particularly when you get down to the local levels and grassroots levels and county parties.
Tharon, we ask you this all the time. What is the Democrats' perspective of the Republican Party now, especially now that the legislature is about to go to work and we're entering a really important political season?
Well, the majority of us amongst ourselves, when we get together, we're united. And because we have a president and President Biden who we're all going to be behind, we have a vice president and Kamala Harris those two are going to be our nominees for president. But then when you start getting into local sort of races and coming off this very sort of disappointing redistricting, I would be honest with you, Lisa, it's a lot of sort of, postpartum sort of post-analysis that's going on about like, what do we really go from here in the Democratic Party? Again, think about it. We have the White House. We have the president and the vice president. We have 2 Democratic senators from Georgia. And Chuck remembers this, right? I mean, when I came up through the politics, when I first met Chuck Clay before he even went to the law firms, when he was in the legislature, I mean, we were a party that didn't have any federal officers. And in the Senate level, we had 2 Republican U.S. senators, and we had only a few congressional members. Now we have a 9-5 congressional delegation, 9 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 2 U.S. senators. So, Lisa, the battle is at the state level. And, when I hear people like Senator Clay and others say there's still some tension there, because honestly, he's right. There's still a huge following of the MAGA extreme right of Donald Trump. Now, you do have some Republicans out there that are trying to move away from that. And Brian Kemp did that because he was able to win his reelection in 2022. We're sort of doing this very delicate dance about sort of criticizing Trump when it was the right thing to do, but also still saying that he would support him if he becomes a nominee. So what Democrats have got to do, Lisa, is, again, federal level, I think we're making progress there. If you look at our local level, look at our 5 or 6 major counties within the 32-county MSA: Clayton, Fulton, Henry, DeKalb, Cobb, Gwinnett, all led by Democrats. Where the challenge for us is that, again, coming off this disappointing redistricting outcome where Judge Jones has decided to approve the maps that the Republican leadership put forward, we've got to figure out how to win there. And that's where I think the tension is. We have a state party that can do more. We have local parties who want more from the state party. And lastly, Lisa, you've heard me talk about this a couple weeks ago. I'm waiting to see the Biden campaign reinvest, and I stress that word, reinvest in Georgia, a place where they won in 2020, to see if those efforts will be duplicated in 24, because I still believe that we can win in this state, but it's going to take organization, it's going to take enthusiasm, and it's going to take money.
Well, I was going to say, I'm never going to comment on my competitor's party. It seems to me for right now, they need to gin up enthusiasm. We need to gin up greater unity and connection. The one thing I would say is at the state level, the governor, the leadership in the House and the Senate, the chairs, by and large, I see good, common sense conservatives in these positions that do reach out, do work with their peers, Democrat and Republican. Certainly they're conservative. Certainly they want to continue to move the state on results-based and individual-based incentives and successes and endeavors. But I'd like to see more of that. In our case, is unification getting down to local levels where there is still a certain level of idea that somehow compromise means you're losing. And compromise does not mean you're losing. If you're a majority Republican, that means you want it to move center right. In many cases with Dems, that might be center left, but I don't categorize anybody that broadly. So for us, it's sort of building back up unity and focus, given that we've got good leadership at the state level. For Dems, it seems more about ginning up enthusiasm and taking what the next steps are following the redistricting and going into this election year.
So I want to ask both of you, how does that landscape trickle down to the voter? And what do you think the voter climate is right now with all this other stuff going on?
Well, think about it. If you're a voter in the state of Georgia right now, this is really the first year, unless you had some very controversial sort of high-level municipal races, most people coming off the holiday are just starting to think about politics, right? Because think about it. The presidential election year is here. You know, Lisa, we're saying this. Can you believe we're in another presidential election year? It seemed like it was just yesterday. I was, asking you to refer to me as a senior advisor for the Biden-Harris campaign. And now we're back on this campaign. And so we're literally, guys, less than a year away from the election. And so I think with the presidential race becoming more of a sort of front and center race in voters' face, I think they'll start paying attention. And then think about the counties that didn't have a big municipal race. And so now it's become very localized. People are paying attention to public safety. People want to make sure that they have safe schools. If you're in these rural counties and even just in this metro area, you're thinking about health care. And so, I think that the voter climate right now is this, Lisa. And I have to say it because I heard it loud and clear during the holidays from a lot of my friends and family. People are discouraged with politics, and they're discouraged with politics because if you don't reinforce the negative things that they hear with positive outcomes, positive policy decisions that are being made, things that are affecting their lives directly, if you don't reinforce their thoughts about it, then they'll be left with these negative sort of thoughts about politicians and about government. We haven't talked about this a lot, but the COVID numbers are on a rise again. And so, so I think that the climate for Democrats, and I'll let Chuck talk about Republicans, is he's right. We're unified. We have our nominees. We have our people at the federal level and local level and some on the state. But there is this enthusiasm gap. And I think the way you get people more enthusiastic about voting and more enthusiastic about the process, and particularly our party, is to go back to that retail sort of politics style that Democrats have been beneficiaries of for so long in this country, but particularly in Georgia. And then lastly, we got to be very honest with the voters. As Georgia sits here and the legislature is going back into session, went back into session this week, we have a surplus. So what are Democrats and Republicans going to do with all that money that they've gotten, partly in that majority from the federal government, but it's also been some good decisions that have been made at the state level by Republicans to save money. What are you going to do to make sure that you restore that confidence from voters and that government really works for them? And so I think that that's that duality that Democrats and Republicans have got to figure out going forward.
It's amazing when you got $20-30 billion, to spend. I mean, we have numbers out there of surpluses that are really quite staggering. Money can solve a lot of problems. I don't know that goes to the fundamental level of unity or enthusiasm. But, there are the issues, whether it's mental health care, whether it's, for lack of a better word, Medicaid or the Kemp medical expansion programs. The vouchers issue is going to be back that continues to divide in terms of how we pay and what we want public dollars to go in terms of our K through 12 education. There are partisan issues out there that are healthy partisan issues. I do think it's time that we invest in those that people infrastructure, because I think over time that does connect a little bit what Tharon's saying. It connects people that government does and can deliver when it's got the ability to do so, not to solve all problems, not to be the ultimate arbiter for all things, but it's a process that at the end of the day can provide services and at both a safety net. When I have Chuck Martin, one of the more conservative members out there, espousing and pushing hard for expanded need scholarships for college and university kids, that's a switch. And those are good things. As he says, when you got the money, put it out there where you're getting bang for the buck. I can't think of a better way to do it than scholarships. Expanding medical services. One of our senators had a heart attack about 6 weeks ago in Milledgeville, severe heart attack. And they found out there is not a cardiologist in Baldwin County. There in Milledgeville isn't just a little backwater.
Wow.
You got two colleges,
Wow.
universities. He had to get life flighted by a helicopter to Macon to save his life. Now, this is somebody that fortunately had wherewithal to get there. For your average person out there, they probably would have died. And those type of things are things that Republicans and Democrats can agree on, even if we disagree on how we provide some of those services and what are the incentives we create to help expand the kind of needs that every citizen has in terms of their children, their education, their safety, their health. And this is a state that has always been a can-do state. So again, this is a broad way of saying, I hope when we go into the next election cycle, it gets tough. It gets down and dirty. It's going to get mean-spirited. They always do, fortunately or unfortunately. Republicans have to figure out how not to look like the party of just ill will, bad faith, and anger, but do what the General Assembly leadership, Republican leadership has done, which is deliver, be conservative, stand for conservative principles, but also help their fellow citizens where they can. And if that means working with Democrats, you do it. If that means barking up your own tree and your own course, you do it. But at the end of the day, if citizens see you're doing work for them, then they're going to feel more connected to government and more enthused about getting out and voting. That's very trite and very simplistic, but I do believe it.
And Lisa, if I can quickly respond to something real quick that the senator said, is that, listen, Milledgeville, as you mentioned, it's a former capital of the state of Georgia. I mean, this is not a city that, I mean, it's rural, but to your point, and I'm shocked.
I was too.
Mr. Chairman, they don't have a cardiologist there. But this is the thing, Lisa. See, what Chuck and I just explained, we're sort of outcasts in our party a little bit, right? No, think about it, because, and I actually don't want him to come back on too many more times before the election, because he just laid out a playbook for Republicans and what they're already trying to do. I mean, think about what he just said. A very conservative Senator Martin, is basically saying, hey, let's look at, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Chuck, but, let's look at this needs-based scholarship program in the state of Georgia. Lisa, this was something that 4 years ago when Stacey and other senators were talking about, and we just talked about this on our earlier week's podcast about sports betting and gambling. This was the meat of the argument, right? And there was this whole notion that needs-based was only, black and brown students. No, there are some people in these rural areas that need needs-based scholarships. But what Republicans are doing in this state, and Democrats, we better wake up. And you just heard Chuck sort of just outline it. They are focusing on good government no matter who gets the credit. Now, don't get me wrong. These Republicans have shown us they'll go right when it's convenient for them to get elected, right? But if they start doing exactly what Chuck just said and say, look, no matter who gets the credit, if there's an issue that we can work together on, then let's work together. Our problem is, Lisa, Democrats, even though we're in the minority party in the state, there's nothing wrong with saying exactly what Chuck just said. Say, hey, I'm willing to work with a Republican like Chuck Martin if he wants to enhance needs-based scholarships. I'm willing to work with this legislature if they want to pass Medicaid expansion, because what's happened is that you get sort of criticized within the Democratic Party if you even sort of allude that you're willing to work with a Republican publicly to get something done. But I think ultimately voters, that's what they want us to do. They want us to figure out common ground, figure out how you're going to pay for it. Don't raise their taxes, but figure out ways to come together to solve problems in communities. And that's what Democrats have got to be bold and audacious about. And don't worry about getting attacked from your party if you come out and say, hey, I've identified a Republican, this woman, a man who wants to help my community, and I'm going to work with them to get this bill passed.
And don't ever forget, people get so focused on the primaries where the most doctrinaire on the left and the right are going to have the loudest voices and a loud share of what that primary vote is going to look like. But if you assume you got somewhere between 5 or 10% voting in the primary and 50 or 60% voting in the general election, going to Tharon's point, you got a whole different constituency then coming out to vote. And you got to be able to, if you can't find a way conservative or more liberal, in my case, conservative, to appeal to that broader vote come November, then your politics ain't where it needs to be, and you're either going to be in the minority or you're going to be moving towards a minority. And I applaud the John Burns and the Burt Jones and the Chuck Martins, and I go down the list, Governor Kemp, and others out there that really seem to have taken this. They came up in a real world of business, and where you have to you have to compromise. You have to build your communities. You have to do those things that make the country, businesses, and communities work, whether it's the Kiwanis Club or the church or the Rotary, or whether it be in state and local government or however it might work. Those are people that are going to be voting come November, and they want to know what is it you've done wisely, not foolishly, not throw money, but wisely, that makes sure that my kids, my grandkids have both a stake and the prospects for a safer, better, healthier, better educated world. The clock's running. And I think the party that does that best is going to be the party that's either going to continue in power, and the Democrats, they're looking for power. But you can't do it by being me, 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 me. I'm going to take up my axe and lance and fight everybody that I possibly can to get there and find out I got to the finish line. And guess what? I'm the only one there.
The world has changed, from shifts in power to a mental health crisis. So with all this social change, how do we balance the human desire for empathy, the business need for productivity, and the hope to make an impact in our community? This is a new podcast, The Social Impact Leader. I'm Jeff Schinnebarker. Join me as we explore people doing work a little different. Available every Wednesday at wabe.org/podcast or wherever you get your podcasts.
WABE.
Hey y'all, I'm Mark Kendall.
And I'm David Perdue.
And we're the hosts of What's Good Atlanta, the new weekly comedy podcast from WABE.
On What's Good Atlanta, we run down uplifting and unusual headlines from the universe known as Atlanta.
And while we may not be journalists, we are comedians, and we'll be breaking down news and breaking down the stories that make you smile.
We're just trying to see what's good, Atlanta.
Episodes drop Fridays at wabe.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I get mine from a guy named Craig.
Shout out to Craig.
WABE.
I think you both agree that voters are still a little weary heading into this election year. But what about distractions? How will those distractions weigh on them? And this is one in particular. Yes, Trump will likely be the nominee, but we just have some breaking news here that, Trump wants Georgia election subversion case thrown out, arguing he's protected from prosecution under presidential immunity. How tired is the community of these types of headlines moving into a really important election year?
Well, listen, there's two thoughts and approaches to this, Lisa. There are some Democrats that would tell me, and I've seen it in polling, that, and we've talked about it on this podcast, that the majority of Georgians, and I think Americans, are saying that if he gets convicted of something, that I think that most Americans have said that that's not something that they would be favorable of. But there's still this portion within the Republican Party who fundamentally made up their mind. We don't care whether he's indicted 200 times and he is, convicted. We're still going to vote for him if his name is on the ballot. And so there are some Democrats out here believe that the more and more it comes out that Trump is resisting this investigation, he's pushing back, he's continuing to promote this false narrative about the election was stolen. I mean, our governor has come out and said, Republicans got to move on from 2020. So there are some people that believe that helps us. Then, Lisa, there's the other side of this, what you just talked about, and that is that now everybody, they pretty much know that Donald Trump is being investigated and is on trial, when thinking 3 or 4 jurisdictions across the country because of his corrupt behavior. Innocent until proven guilty, but the evidence is damning. It's pretty poignant that he surrounded himself with a lot of bad people who did some bad things. Whether or not he knew about it or he participated, that's what the trials will point out. So I think that the majority of Americans pretty much know who he is. They've accepted it, and I think that majority of Democrats and even the people in the middle who voted for Joe Biden the first time, they unless Joe Biden gives them a reason not to vote for him, they're going to vote for him again. Like, I think the people who voted for Trump the first time, 2016, and then maybe didn't vote for him in 2020, that's what the battleground is. And so it is a distraction, Lisa. And what I'm worried about is this, and I'll shut up because I know Chuck has got something to say here, is that the more convoluted, the more negative, the more chaotic it is around voting. And that Donald Trump, remember, it was just 4 years ago. He didn't even believe in the U.S. Postal Service. He told everybody that don't send your absentee ballots in because your ballots won't be counted correctly. I mean, the more chaos, the more confusion to voters. The question is whether or not does that benefit Democrats or Republicans. What Democrats have got to do is that we've got to try to break through the noise and create less distractions for voters and try to make them understand the kitchen table issues that the Democrats are continuing to deliver on. But unfortunately, Lisa, this is 2024. Donald Trump is laser-like focused on, I think, just making things chaotic in Georgia. And I think we'll have more and more distractions as we go into even the March primaries. Before we even get to November, we're going to have primaries here in March. And I think you'll see a lot of this dissension that the Republicans are promoting come out even more before we get to that election.
Yeah, I mean, it's still one of those issues that the Republicans bear. These are my opinions, not anything official on that. I still think elections ultimately are about the future. I do have concerns that if we're rehashing 2020 and certain folks, that seems to be the cause celeb for the rest of their lives, then that's fine. But I'm not sure that's a pathway to ultimate victory and building a lasting coalition. Look, this is still a Republican-controlled state, and it is there for a reason, which is, at least for now, voters have said, we like the directions, the issues, and things that Republicans have done. And I was certainly here when that was not the case. But if we get mired into where anger, fury, 2020, hurling insults to each other, and Republicans spending more time tearing up Republicans than looking to the challenge of a Democratic partisan election in November, of course that has potential negative ramifications. And I implore Republicans, whatever the result is, look to the future. Find a way to bury the hatchet, so to speak, even if you feel aggrieved on 2020 to the day you die. Time, place, historians will figure out what happened. I think the facts, at least as I understand them, I would probably agree with there and speak for themselves. But I understand people don't agree with me. Probably don't agree with him either, particularly in the Republican Party. However, that intensity can be a plus. It can be a plus to sort of say, this is why we need to do better. We need to take up the ill will and turn that, if not into goodwill, at least passion to get people out. And that means maybe bringing two people that you don't agree with 100%, but are more conservative than the Democrats that they're running against, and find a way to get across the finish line so everybody can claim part of the victory. And Tharon knows this as well as anybody. You break up into little sects and groups. That does not bode well for a victorious campaign come November. It's about adding numbers. It's about 50 plus 1. I used to preach this to the Republicans all the time. If you can't count to 50 plus 1, then you're not in a political party. You're in a debating society. And that's fine and good. Do that all you want. But if you want to win, you better figure out how to count to 50 plus 1. And that doesn't generally mean everybody who just agrees with Chuck on everything, because I don't even do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Clay has spoken, former chairman of the GOP party, former state senator, and a friend of WABE. Thank you so much for joining us today for Political Breakfast. We always enjoy hearing your perspective. Tharon, we got to do it again sometime with Chuck, right?
Well,
Absolutely.
You guys have done nothing but improve my credibility. I don't know about the reverse being true. But hey, anytime I can be seen with any of these beautiful faces, including yours, Tharon, I'm a happy camper.
Thank you so much for checking in with us, and have a wonderful day.